So I was really sad to hear the news about Sinead O'Connor passing. She was so talented and an absolute icon. So Sinead O'Connor has passed away in her second Saturn return. This is another horrendous, tragic death of somebody going through their Saturn return. And the reason this happens astrologically is because we come up against our limits during a Saturn return. It feels like a burden. Our responsibilities and how serious life gets when we are experiencing a Saturn return can feel totally impossible to shift, and the weight of that can feel crushing. It's make or break, and unfortunately, so many people, it becomes a breaking point, and they decide, often, it is a decision. It does tend to be a conscious choice or even unconscious actions that lead to a death. So Club 27 and Saturn returns and early death among celebrities and generally young people struggling with this transit is pretty well documented. Sinead O'Connor has passed away, which is an absolute horrific tragedy. She was having a really tough time. Her son died last year, and she was also in her second Saturn return. Saturn returns to the same zodiac sign that it was in when we were born, when we are aged between around 26 to 31, and again when we are in our late 50s or around the age of 60. Sinead O'Connor was in her second Saturn return. So Saturn is in Pisces right now, and when she was born, Saturn was also in Pisces. I think it was around 23 degrees. So this is a powerful transit. It brings up whatever needs to be restructured in our life, and it really makes us come up against our inner demons and our own boundaries. My dad died in his second Saturn return too. He was 58. So they tend to be sudden deaths, and they are often hugely tragic. Second Saturn returns tend to bring up what has not been dealt with in our first Saturn return. So it's really important if you're going through your first Saturn return. So if you are aged between 27 and 30 right now, you're probably in it. So Saturn entered Pisces this year. It brings up really powerful emotions, and it also causes us to come up against our uttermost endpoint and limits. We often feel during a Saturn return that we are refinding who we are, or looking for a much deeper meaning in life, or that we are coming up against barriers that we don't know how to overcome. Saturn returns tend to signal big, massive change in our life and transformation, and that can bring up huge upheaval, grief. It can restart grief cycles. You know, if you've grieved on one level for something, sometimes a Saturn return can bring up a deeper level of grief that you have to work through and re-find yourself through. It's about redefining who you are, what your purpose is in life, and where you're limited, what you can change and what you can't. And this is huge stuff, and for some of us it is too much to take. It's not an easy thing to deal with when we lose somebody. After my dad died, I was wrestling with my own spirituality, my own grief from both my mum dying and my dad then passing as well. And, you know, I'd lost other people in my life, and it stirred all of that up for me. And then I came into my Saturn return. And actually through my Saturn return, I renounced and kind of totally became skeptical of everything spiritual. But I remember looking into my own Saturn return and also having this moment of realizing that my dad was in his second Saturn return when he died. And that realization of things making sense and realizing how much he was struggling. And, you know, at the time I didn't realize, I didn't know about how difficult he was finding his life. He'd got to a point where he had pushed himself to every limit in every direction, and I think a lot of that hit home for him. You know, his health was bad and he was not taking care of himself, and I think he felt like he had no way out. He didn't know how to get better, and I also think that there was a big push for him to do things on his own terms. I think he felt really compelled to be taking ownership of his own mortality, his own time on this planet, and, you know, a step forward into the other side. And I think sometimes when we're dealing with huge things, it's easy to take too much of something. These unnaturally early deaths tend to be heralded by huge grief for people, where they come up against their mortality, but also that connection to the next life and who we are on a spiritual level. And it's almost like they're getting to a point where they say, I've had enough of being on this plane of existence. This is too hard. It's too much.